Pravi, good morning, and thank you very much for making the time to actually come here. I want to start off our discussion around corruption issues with what the Star newspaper is talking about. I want to link this discussion to some of what their headlines are talking about. And the Star on the front page, their headline goes with another dodgy tender exposed. And this is in relation to Gauteng, irregular 140 million rand health contract terminated after intervention by the Gauteng Treasury.
The president. What's incredible about this story is that the MEC of Health, who is now, sitting at home, and his department went into this arrangement of enlisting the services of a company that has stood to benefit, knowing fully well that there was a conflict of interest. There was everything wrong with what they were doing. That, for me, is the most incredible part of the story.
Vuyo, the MEC, as you say, currently on suspension, but it does not absolve the Premier either, because if you listened to the words of the Premier on Friday, he said all of these contracts that are being spoken about in Gauteng, with the estimated value of about 2.2 billion rand, no money is really exchanged hands, except that there were purchase orders that were sent out as confirmation letters, but no money exchanged hands. And then you have on Sunday, Piet Rambedi, through the independent newspapers, saying 80 million rand was actually paid to Royal Bata Projects, which is a company owned by Cosatu's husband. Who's lying here?
You see, and that is the thing, because no amount of washing your hands, as the Premier has done, as the biblical Pontius Pilate did, is going to help this administration. And this is really the same argument that Cosatu is making in its criticism of the president, that saying the right things or being seen to be acting when in reality that is not happening. Your inability to put, in fact, Cosatu is just so fair in its criticism and well balanced. There's a line, for example, that says, while the hydra of corruption predates President Cyril Ramaphosa's administration, the dysfunction and feebleness of his administration in the face of a crisis is alarming. In other words, say, hey, we know for a fact that you inherited a lot of the nonsense that we are currently seeing, but we submit that you've actually done very little, if anything, to actually change things around. And that is really the problem, whether you're looking at the Premier of Gauteng or the President of South Africa.
And that's why the President, describing those who are involved in this malfeasance at a time like this, he says they are hyenas circling a wounded prey. I want to also, Vuyo, quickly then look at the front page of the Pretoria News, because, again, we are speaking about the whole issue around PPE corruption. And PPEs, the headline goes, found in Henops. That's the Henops River. I think it's in Pretoria. These are boxes of personal protective equipment dumped in that river at a time when in Gauteng, just a report yesterday saying 8 doctors who work in our public hospitals have died, either because they were not given PPE, if it was given to them, it's substandard, or they are told that they're going to use PPE for long periods of time, whether it be a mask, simply because they are not in a COVID-19 ward. That compromises these doctors. So this is the issue that the president is referring to. But again, we go back to the same discussion about there's got to be less talk, Mr. President, and more action.
In fact, a big part of Cosatu's criticism stems from its own affiliate unions' problems with health in particular. They still insist that they are not getting enough personal protective equipment. Hospitals and clinics are short-staffed, and they are not being listened to whenever they raise their issues. Now, go back to some of what we saw in the Eastern Cape, where people's tests that were supposed to make their way to laboratories were found on the side of the road. We haven't had the aggressive testing that was promised, and where it happens, some of these tests get lost, as was the case in the Eastern Cape. So there is a lot going on that is wrong. And remember, money has been paid to actually source these, but they have not ended up where they are supposed to be. And that is why you then ask yourself, what exactly is going on, or at what point? Because the president really had a lot of goodwill. I mean, he was one lucky president. When he took over, people pinned so much hope in him and his ability to actually turn things around. Everyone knows that we're coming from an era where your state law enforcement agencies were hollowed out. We're coming from an era where the governing party in particular didn't, cover themselves in glory. And he promised to actually change all of that. But everyone is now being frustrated. I mean, if you listen to business leaders, when you listen to his own comrades, Cosatu may be the first to speak out publicly, but for a good couple of months now, people have been saying, wow, we had so much hope in this person.
But what is different?
Where we are.
What is different with this administration from the previous one, which some people have said is actually unfair. But Vuyo, I want to go back to the front page of the Star newspaper, if the team will try and ready that for us. There's another sub-headline down below, and that is a massive story that broke yesterday. The joint operation by Eskom, working alongside the SIU to try and recoup 3.8 billion rand. And that's the headline at the bottom of the Star newspaper. The Eskom execs unfazed by SIU moves, the story goes. Look, whilst we lamenting that the president is not really moving, and indeed, rightly so, the NPA, where are they when it comes to arresting these people? At least some action seems to be taken. This is an effort to try and claim those monies back, or claw those monies back from people like Brian Mulife, Ben Gubane, Matela Koko, the likes of Mosebenzi Zwane, of course, who we are told were working hand in glove with the Guptas.
Of course, I mean, they have poured cold water over this thing. They don't think it's going to stand. But we have to appreciate the fact that there's a great deal of effort being put into it, into ensuring that people go to jail and or pay back the money. And that's what South Africans have been asking for. And they have not been asking for the perfect case, because the more you sit this thing out, nothing is happening. Then people think the culture of impunity continues, and they lose hope in those who have entrusted with positions of responsibility that they will ever, change our misfortunes. And so for this to happen is a good thing. Whether these people will indeed pay back the money at the end of the day is, for now, neither here nor there. An effort, or every effort, no effort must be spared in ensuring that these people go to prison and they do pay back the money. And that is what is important. And that is what some of the criticism that has been leveled against the NPA is that even though they have serious capacity constraints, and internally the organization the center within that organization wasn't quite holding. But over time, people have said, but we're not seeing any movement at all. So when we begin to see this kind of thing, I think people's hopes will be restored, that we may just be on the right track. But it doesn't absolve the president and the governing party, because the rot truth be told, starts there. And they know the people who are actually involved in these sorts of things. This story about the MEC of Health and this tender, this dodgy tender that has now been exposed, we're not going to hear
the end of it.
And in fact, this is only a tip of the iceberg. This thing goes bigger. It's bigger and it's more broad than what we have been told already. You can see just by reading between the lines.
Vuyo, I've got to tell you, I'm scared to even think about what is going to be uncovered in other provinces. Gauteng just appears to be the epicenter right now, and it also appears to have been the one province found out about the possibilities of how these COVID-19 funds can be corruptly accessed. But quite right, the NPA at the back of criticism here. Some are saying, actually, you guys are trying to look for a perfect case. You are never going to take to court a perfect case. Where is,
in fact, the perfect case is, well, one perfect case is what brought us where we are. If you remember back in the day when that institution was supposed to actually prosecute Jacob Zuma, and it decided not to. And you know what happened.
Vuyo Mvogo, let's stop it there. Thank you very much. That's Vuyo Mvogo joining me this morning for the Coffee Chat.